Hey guys, Vance here. Before we jump into this amazing episode, just a quick note. The audio on my side is not that great. Our guest's audio is good. Something happened to my audio. Our guest today is Richard McColl from Colombia Calling. He's an absolute OG of expats in Colombia, so we wanted to put out the episode anyway. So just bear with me that the audio is not great. Still more or less listen toable. But just wanted to add this quick note at the start of the episode. Understand if you want to give this one a pass, it's still legit. I honestly don't talk that much. We let Richard do all the talking and giving us some amazing stories from the early days of Colombia. So if you're a Colombia enthusiast, definitely still give this episode a listen. Again, the guest today is Richard McColl from Colombia Calling. And without further ado, let's crack into the episode. Welcome back to the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. My guest today is Richard McColl from Colombia Calling. He's a podcaster, an author, a hotelier, and really one of the OGs when it comes to expats living in Colombia and Latin America. So, Richard, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Vance. It's an absolute pleasure. Flattering to be called one of the OGs. I don't feel like it. Many days Colombia continues to surprise me, and I, will look through the lens of a novice at this wonderful country that I now call home.
And you've been in Colombia for a long time, like 10 years, more?
More. I moved here full time in 2007. I first came in 1998. I'd been moving around the continent, well, Central and South America, really since about 1998.
Good. So you're kind of in the vein of old-time Victorian explorers, British conquering the world.
Well, I'm trying to decolonize a bit my behavior around that and rethink things, but I'm not traveling with a steam trunk or anything like that. I was a backpacker for a while. Then I got a job that let me travel around equally as a freelance journalist. And I like to say that I stayed long periods of time in each place. And then after certain circumstances, decided, you know what? I'm staying here in Colombia. This is where I want to be. And I've made a home.
That's great. And I don't think I can emphasize enough for the audience, like how much of an OG you are. And that being said, though, I don't know. I'm almost not the best person to be interviewing you because I know there's a lot I don't know about your story. I've heard some things here and there. Um, but you did Expat Files too, right? And you kind of recently relaunched that?
No, that wasn't me. That was Colin Post.
That's Colin Post.
Colin
Okay,
Post, but
okay.
he was a long time. He was a long time here, but he's moved to Peru. He got married, had a kid, lives in Peru. I don't know if he's actually moved back to St. Louis, Missouri. He might have done. I haven't spoken to him in a long time.
You guys used to be buddies.
Well, we knew one another. You know, when you're here long enough, you fall into the same sort of routines and see one another. I mean, we didn't. I mean, we knew one another. I kind of helped out a bit when he wrote a book about this errant Irishman we refer to as the Mick. Now he is the OG. He's been here since the 80s. I think he's here illegally now. He was jailed for cocaine smuggling and then got out, and he still lives sort of on the peripheries of life in Bogota. I see him every now and then. It must be in his 60s, a white man's afro who wanders around town with an umbrella.
Why don't we kick things off for the podcast with the story? Do you want to tell a bit more of the story of the Mick, or do you have like a go-to story to shock our audience a little bit?
Well, yeah, the Mick is a good story. I mean, he did. So Colin Post wrote the story of the Mick. They were great friends, and I guess they've been around a long time. The Mick is an Irishman. In the 80s, he came over to smuggle drugs back to Ireland with his then girlfriend. I think they may have been mules swallowing the drugs even back then. I can't quite remember. Oh no, because that wasn't done back then. But they had cocaine to take back to Ireland, and well, it was caught. His girlfriend was given a shorter sentence and sent back to Ireland because she was pregnant. So, on sort of humanitarian grounds, she was sent back to Ireland. He's never met his son because he's been here ever since. I think he spent 4 or 5 years in jail, and now he's sort of like the most qualified or the most experienced English teacher in Colombia because he's been here since the 80s. You sort of see him wandering around. I've met up with him a couple of times, but it works out as being a pretty expensive meetup because wherever you go, usually like a tienda del barrio, a little shop on the corner, he just orders as many beers as he can for that period of time, and you sort of roll out of there. And well, I mean, he's essentially an alcoholic, so but it's very, very interesting to chat to him and his stories about what's going on. He was, I mean, yeah, I don't know. He was locked up or had contact with one of the gangsters. There was a very famous robbery in England near the airport. I think they even did a Netflix show about it called the Brinks Mat Gold robbery. One of the people involved in that ended up in Colombia, and I think he ended up being a friend of Collins, the Mick here. He may have died in a knife fight in a brothel in downtown Bogota. So I don't know. I don't know. I mean, there are so many things that are hearsay about what goes on because again, I'm a family man. I don't get meddled up, and messed up in all of these things. I just hear things. You've been here long enough, you start to hear things.
I'm sure. So you brand yourself the English voice in Colombia. You're from England?
I am from England. I'm from London. I was born and raised. My dad is Canadian, long passed on, so I'm half Canadian. I'm quite proud of that, but you can hear my accent. I was born and raised in England. Actually, the English voice in Colombia, I never coined that. That was coined by someone else, a listener and a fellow writer here, Vicky Kellaway, who wrote Banana Skin Flip Flops blog and Colombia Country of a Comedy of Errors. She said, "You are the English voice in Colombia," and I thought that's quite cool, and I'll use that as the tagline for the Colombia Calling podcast. So we produce the Colombia Calling podcast once a week, and we've been doing it for more than 10 years now. I think we're coming up to 11 years, 517 episodes.
Wow.
My co-host Emily Hart is based in Medellin, and she deals with the news. She does an excellent Colombia briefing every week as well, and it's nice to have someone sort of across the way. I'm in Bogota, she's in Medellin, has a different view on things, and we often do interviews together. She also takes over on occasions when she's got a great interview to do. So we cover every topic around Colombia, good, bad, anything. We cover it. The most popular ones are the more chatty ones, where people feel like they're sitting down, maybe drinking a pint of Guinness with us. The listener feels like he's enjoying that as well. But the most popular one still to date is episode 375, which was with Sergio Guzman, who's a political analyst and risk analyst here for Colombia Risk Analysis. He gave us an incredible background on why Colombians were protesting in 2019. And I think it goes to show that people go out there and now look for more independent reporting on things. And still today, it gets downloads for people, I guess, referencing it. So it's really cool to be out here on the air and know and see the listener figures and to continue to do this. Obviously you go through periods you're like, I can't do this anymore, but then you're like, oh, we've gone 517 episodes. You can definitely keep going. It's fun.
You ever run out of guests?
On occasion, people flake out. People flake out. They come to you sometimes for the interviews and stuff, and then they flake out. They don't want to do it. Um, but I can always go back to people, and there's enough people here doing amazing things, and then it's sort of Colombians overseas as well doing amazing things. The key listener for me, people in the US. We get a lot of listeners from the Colombian diaspora, perhaps who don't even
Mm.
speak Spanish. Second, third generation. and they want to learn more about their country. So that's quite flattering as well, to hear that. So yeah, you run out of guests, but there's always someone. There's always someone. It just depends.
That's cool. You definitely got to get me on sometime, by the
Yeah,
way.
definitely. No, I mean, I can't believe I have to. Well, yeah, I'd love to have you on. It would be a nice one to talk, lightweight about travel in Colombia and stuff and your experiences and what is the
Hmm.
Latin life and everything, my Latin life. Where are you now, by the way?
Mexico.
Okay, it's a great place to be.
Yeah. I know you probably got more stories than me, so let's try to see what I can dig out of you. I guess we'll touch upon family briefly, share what you're comfortable with, but I think it's cool that you've probably made the transition from being a backpacker traveler to now full-time expat and family man raising a family in Colombia. Did you ever have thoughts of going back to raise your kids in England and giving them that English education, or are you more happy with how things are done in Colombia?
Well, I've got my kids into an aspirational school here, bilingual, and so on. They're very settled. So that's a huge thing, looking at how happy my children are. Every now and then you go like, oh, it would be nice to internationalize them a little bit, get them over to England, but maybe we consider this if they want to go to university later on. That would be easy, or finish up high school over there. But at the moment, my oldest son is 9, and he's incredibly happy with his circle of friends and the school that he's in. My little one is 4. He'll be starting at the same school as his older brother come late August. So at the moment, things are good. I didn't ever know that I would stay here or not somewhere else. I've always loved Colombia. It seemed like a natural fit at the end of it for a journalist. There's always something going on here. I would
Mhm.
like to have my kids spend a bit more time in the UK. Just again, get them a bit of their heritage so they understand. But they both speak fluent English and fluent Spanish, and isn't that's like the best thing that one could give them.
Mhm.
As I said, yeah, backpacker to traveler to resident. I never really think of myself now as an expat per se, but we always get grouped together. I kind of think of myself as an immigrant now. I'm here. I have
Mm.
businesses, married, kids, participate in Colombian life. I'm freelance, so I don't earn like someone who works at a multinational or in an embassy. So I feel a little bit different. But I like. I mean, I love being here. So at the end of the day, it won't be my decision. If we go back, it will be taken. I know that my wife, who is Colombian, would love to live overseas, and if my kids, say, it's time for us to go over there, then I will heed that advice and that desire from them.
Mhm. I'm not sure if you've like what kind of concerns have you had with raising kids in Colombia, or in your opinion, what are some of the pros and cons? Because I think a lot of our audience, at least at My Latin Life, there lots of people in their 20s, of course, lots of people in their 30s and 40s. I see the statistics on the podcast, and a lot of people have to come to that decision about where should they raise a family, and what are the pros and cons of doing it in Latin America versus the quote unquote Western world.
Hmm.
Obviously, things are super weird in the Western world now with the woke stuff and the take your kids from you stuff, and maybe they end up being more spoiled brats or entitled or something. Who knows? But there's downsides to Colombia too.
Hmm.
For example, most people can't really do basic math in their head. So, so I mean, how do you think about the trade offs?
Well, my first thing is that I come from a very very small family, of which there are none now in the UK. So that's a big cutting the cord there. But um, living in Colombia, is a true joy in terms of family unity. Now, my in-laws live in a town, well, Mompos, where I have businesses, which is a long way away from Bogota. But the family is so very united, and to see my children growing up with such a an amazing, I would say, circle of the family unit, something that I never had really in terms of the width and breadth, depth and breadth of it,
Hmm.
is it's very different, and I am very appreciative of that. My sister-in-law lives close by with her husband, and they're there on hand for anything, and they would do anything for their for their nephews. So I would say that the upside is that. Upside is definitely that family unity. Downside, of course, we always consider the security implications of living in Colombia. It's still Colombia. I live in a nice, well-heeled neighborhood, tree-lined streets, and so on. But you still are aware of where
Hmm.
you are, just a little bit. But I've been here so long. I'm I'm more afraid now getting in my car and being in a dreadful crash because of the way everyone drives, rather than being robbed on the street. So I don't know. I actually think that the pros of being here outweigh the cons. I'm able to put myself into my sons into bilingual schools. I'm able to work from home and do what I want to do, um, and live well. If we went back to England, things would be very different on that front. I mean, the cost of living is just ridiculous. Getting into a school as well, it's tough. It's a tough one. But again, it's not off. It's not off the possibilities of in the future. I mean, there was a point, obviously, COVID time, when we were like, maybe it's time to go because things were so grim here. But my second son had only really just been born just prior to COVID. And you're like, this is not a moment to move. This is not a moment to make that. And I'm glad we didn't. So, I mean,
Hmm.
we were talking about it, and that's about it.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean the family structure. You mentioned that a bit, and how the cousins and stuff will do anything for the nieces is probably a huge difference, at least compared to North American culture, and I imagine England too, where you ask cousins or something to watch the kids in England, and they act like you're burdening them, right? Where and in Latin America, they're like so happy to do it, and looking for every opportunity to throw a birthday party and this and that, and
Yeah.
um, you've probably experienced that
Mm.
warmth.
That said, I do get special dispensation to not have to attend every family reunion because there's just too many. I'll go to the key ones. There's the grandmother who's in her upper 90s, almost close to 100. Yeah, I'll go to that one. My parents-in-law, yeah, those. My sister-in-law, yeah. But when we start getting more, when that flow chart of the family gets broader and broader, then I'm allowed to sort of step away.
But they're there.
They are there. Oh, believe me, they're there. Well, if you think on one side of my wife's family, the maternal side, they're 12 or 11 brothers and sisters, of of her parents, let's say, family unit. There's 11 brothers on the maternal
Hmm.
side, and probably 7 on the paternal side. That's a lot.
That's a lot of birthdays.
Oh yeah, and I yeah, I don't have to go to those.
Okay, let's switch it up. I would love to get into like some of these old expat stories, kind of like the Mick. I don't know what I can prompt or ask to you to get into some of these, but maybe you have a couple on deck that you'd like to share.
Just think about the expat stories. I got to think about that a little bit. I mean, the Mick is the most incredible person. Oh, but then there's like what's his name? Wally Broderick, the father. He's been here even longer. I think he was. he's Australian originally, and he was training to be a Catholic priest, and then abandoned it and became the principal writer of the history of the ELN guerrillas, and he's still to this day like the go-to guy for this. But there's another story. There's Andrew Loog Oldham, or I mean, it might be Oldham Loog, but Loog Oldham, who was one of the first managers of the Rolling Stones in London. And he gave it all up. I mean, he was one of the key people of that swinging 60s era in the extravagant clothing and so on around Carnaby Street. He now lives with his wife. I don't know if he's had children. He must be in his upper 70s by now, like the Rolling Stones themselves. He now lives in like a recluse up the mountain over from Bogota in a place called Chuachi, raising chickens. It's like I didn't even know he was here until someone managed to get him onto he wouldn't come down for this event. There was an event in Bogota that he was invited to speak at, and he said, "No, I'll just do it virtually from my home." Just doesn't want to ever leave home. I don't know. He raises chickens is all I know. The first manager of the Rolling Stones in London. So we've got these people. There was a drummer who lived in Via Leyva as well, who I think was a drummer for Elvis Presley, but he's passed away now. But there's a few of them sort of dotting around who just have the most incredible stories. But again, they're not like they're not that accessible because they've been here so long, and they're incredibly assimilated into life, and they do their own things. If I can think of others, I try, but those are the ones that come off the top of my head at this moment.
Mm-hmm. What does your circle kind of look like in Bogota, in Colombia? Because you're kind of in this old school expat sphere, if I had to describe it as such.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as if I have like a a limitation on who I'll meet up with. I'll meet up with anyone, someone who listens to the podcast and says I'd love to have a coffee. I'll go and have a coffee. I limit it to one meeting or two a week, especially if they're Colombians that live overseas. I do that. So that's that side of things. But my sort of circle of friends, a few expats, they've been here a long time as well. And then largely Colombians, the people, obviously you make friends with those parents who have kids in the same school as you, and people who have, I mean, everything then gets dictated by children, it's like it is their apartment, it is their home, and we organize more uh, social activities around then. So you have to hope that they make friends with kids whose parents you're going to like. So that's kind of my social circle. But there's a social circle of journalists, and we're always in communication as well, both Colombian
Mm-hmm.
and foreign. Always sort of sharing information and stuff. And I make sure that we try and even journalists who are based in Medellin or elsewhere, that we touch base every now and then, see what's going on. It's always good to sort of, have these people from outside of Colombia with whom to chat and perhaps sort of mull over ideas of what's taking place and so on.
Sure. So fundamentally, you're a journalist. Now you're a hotelier, among other things, podcaster. But do you consider yourself fundamentally a journalist?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still the Colombia Calling podcast started as a hobby, but it's taken a large portion of my life. I used to write. Well, I still try to write for the Globe and Mail, Foreign Policy magazine, publications in the UK, and so on. I was I've done a lot of reporting. I get brought onto the BBC to pundits or on other outlets to do radio and TV work and so on. So I consider myself a journalist. I'm now the host of the Latin News podcast, which is out of an entity in England called Latin News. and that's been going since 1967. They decided that they wanted to do a podcast, came to me, and we do a fortnightly podcast about stuff in the region. Just recorded on Panama's upcoming elections. The week before that was from Belize and Brazil, criminality and so on. So for me, it's been very exciting to be able to get back into reporting from across the region and not just sort of Colombia, Ecuador, maybe Venezuela. So I keep doing all those things. Hotels came up out of sort of chance. I was in the town of Mompos in 2007, writing a piece for a magazine about the Easter week celebrations, and just thought this is the most amazing place. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site that nobody knows about. And I ended up in 2007 buying a house, which, I won't go into the costs, but nobody was gambling or betting on Colombia. The dollar to the peso was incredible. I had a lot of money saved up from all the work, because I was paid to move from location to location. And over time now, I've got 3 houses in this town. One is my own house. One is the Casa Amarilla, which we opened in 2008. That's the original one, the original hotel. It's a mid-range place, upper mid-range, very nice colonial standard home, 10 rooms. And in 2019, just in time for the pandemic, we opened our luxury place called San Rafael, right in front of the river, beautiful 7-room place, swimming pool, everything you would think of. But we're doing well. I mean, that's, the side of a place in the middle of nowhere, rural Colombia, but it evokes an authentic, maybe forgotten Colombia because of the distance away, and that is why it's attractive. It's a town that inspired the writings of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and we're now 10 years since the Nobel Prize winning author from Colombia died, and his new book was brought out, perhaps erroneously, this year by his children. He didn't want it brought out. Nos vemos en agosto, or en agosto nos vemos. His children did it, I think, squeezing the last opportunities of wealth from their dad. But it's that kind of town. The colonial center is like 45 square blocks, so small. But can you imagine a colonial town, a little bit like Parachi in Brazil, but without a beach, but all the way along this beautiful river? It's got that kind of feel,
Yeah, it seems to be very well preserved,
Yeah,
the
well, very
colonial
much so.
architecture.
And it's the government has seen an uptick in foreign tourism. It's never huge, and national tourism, and they realize we need to look after this place. So we've had a huge restoration project. The walkways along the.
Oop. I just muted you. If you can unmute yourself. I don't know how to do that. Cut. How do I unmute you here?
Got it.
Hey guys, quick break from the podcast to tell you about job stacking. If you're a remote or hybrid worker looking to maximize your earning potential, then Rolf Haltza, author of Job Stacking, guarantees you'll be able to double your income by implementing his paycheck multiplication layering method. This is the exact system Rolf has used to take his own income and those of many others beyond $20K a month. With this method, Rolf contractually guarantees that you'll be able to double your income in 45 days. So, if you're interested in unleashing your earning potential and doubling your income, then click the link in the description and book a call with Rolf right now. Hey guys, quick break from the episode to tell you about BitRefill. BitRefill allows you to shop online and in person without banks, converting your crypto directly into merchant balance. We're talking gift cards to Nike, Amazon, Apple, Airbnb, Hotels.com, and many more, all paid for with crypto. BitRefill offers more than 10,000 gift card options in 180 countries all across Latin America, including Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, El Salvador, and many more. You can also apply the code MyLatinLife at checkout to get 10% back on your first purchase. Go to bitrefill.com for more information. So Mampos looks interesting. It also looks very far from Bogota. How does one get from Bogota to Mampos if they want to stay at the Casa Maria?
Well, it's a 12-hour drive, so I don't recommend that. If you're going to go sort of, hopping from colonial town to colonial town and you go north out of Bogota, then that's cool because you could go Bogota, Villa de Leyva in Boyacá, from Villa de Leyva to Barichara in Santander, Santander then to Monpós in Bolivar. And then from Bolivar, you could go up to Cartagena or Santa Marta. So there's that option for you there. But what I would say is we have a new system of flights. We've always had an airport, but it hasn't had commercial flights for some reason. And now we have commercial flights from Cartagena. So it's not even a 40-minute flight, like a 20-minute flight for Cartagena with Satena. And we have flights from Medellin direct as well, which is like an hour flight on
Well,
Satena. So that's the best way because otherwise it's a 5-hour drive from Cartagena or Santa Marta. And, that's still quite far. So I would say take the flights and
from
ensure
Medellin.
that they don't get cancelled.
Yeah. Is it from the city Medellin airport?
Yeah, the one right downtown because they're
Yeah,
propeller
yeah.
flights.
Propeller flight. That's
Yeah,
pretty
it's
cool.
cool. It's cool because you're flying low and you get to see the countryside. And then when you fly over the area where Monpos is, it's all like a wetland, like a
Mm-hmm.
bayou, like New Orleans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking at it on the map. It's crazy. So it's very low elevation, I'm guessing.
About a
Probably pretty
meter.
humid.
It's hot. Always
It's
hot.
hot.
People always ask me, they always say, "Oh, when's the least hot time?" Nah, it's always hot.
It's
It,
hot.
it's always hot. It's always 30, 31, 30. The coldest it gets is 28.
Definitely two extremes of the country, Bogota and Mampos.
It's a good schizophrenic change in lifestyle.
Speaking about journalism, I want to try to get some more stories out of you because I know every journalist has a million stories and other journalists, and you guys share the stories. I was thinking, do you know Matt Yuki?
Yeah, I do. Everyone thinks he's a spy.
He's one of the only journalists that's like has been quite active on Twitter in the past, and a
Yeah,
lot of the guys kind of know him. I've been trying to get him on the podcast. He's hard to get.
yeah,
I thought that might be a kickoff point to just start thinking about some of the journalists, and they just have crazy stories, like the Colombian ones specifically. They're hanging out with the FARC or who
yeah.
knows what.
Well, I've got a bunch of friends who are conflict photographers, and those guys have some sort of chip that's been burnt out in their head. To be a conflict photographer, you've got to uh, you use your camera as the shield, but of course it doesn't protect you. One of my friends is called Malcolm Linton. He's up in the U.S. now, but he was down here a lot, and he used to go and spend time in FARC encampments and photograph. He's got a great book called Metamorphosis because it's around the time of the peace accords, so there's this unease. But prior to that, I mean, he's 10 years older than me. He spent time in the conflicts in the civil war in El Salvador, in Nicaragua. I mean, he's seen stuff. The guy being basically having his genitals blown off in Nicaragua, I think, and he's on the gurney. This is the soldier who had his genitals blown off, and he's on the gurney saying, "Yeah, viva la patria!" He's still out there spouting nationalist uh, utterances, and that's one thing that Malcolm said. He said that's when it really hit home. This nature. Malcolm also covered the cholera epidemic or Ebola epidemic, I think, and I want to say Rwanda or something. I mean, the guy's been everywhere. And then there's the conflict photographer Carlos Villalon, who's originally from Chile, who's been here forever. That guy used to get down with the FARC all the time, and he did a great book as well called Coca, and it's like a study of the coca plant, right from where it was picked all the way to the end, and addicts in New York, up in the Bronx and beyond. Then there's another old school guy who comes and goes, more of a writer, Toby Muse, I mean, he's a conflict journalist who's done stuff in Afghanistan and Syria, but again, spent a lot of time out there in the wilds of Colombia. These guys, they're better to talk to than me. His partner, Monica, was kicked out of Venezuela by Chavez. You know, she was given a certain amount of time to leave after she asked him like I think a like a pointed question that he didn't like. And I think he obviously he was very good at redirecting the speech and stuff, and he redirected it to avoid answering the question, but then secrets it gave her like a day and a half to get out of Venezuela. So there's all these sort of things that pop up. Matt Yuki, yeah, he does a lot of travel. He might be in Panama right now. Joshua Collins, who's set up his own indie sort of news site for the region called Pirate Wire Services. He's always getting himself into scrapes. He was out there in the coca growing areas last year, looking at the price of coca, of course, the crop used to make cocaine. He was out there, investigating coca prices and was given sort of a little bit of leeway by the criminal gangs in that area. He's always up there on the edge of the Darien. The best reporting on the Darien was not. I mean, the New York Times did a good series on it about a year ago. Obviously, the Darien Gap, where all the migrants are coming through from all over the world. I myself have seen them from Somalia, from Togo, and other places. But the best was done by an independent sort of filmmaker, journalist, Nadia Drost, who hiked it several years beforehand with people from the Congo, I believe. And that she brought out in an excellent report, which won the Pulitzer Prize in California Weekend magazine, which sadly no longer exists, but you can find the article online, and a couple of short documentaries that were brought out on PBS. Carlos Villalon, who I previously mentioned, has done that trip 5-6 times. I mean, these guys have a different, a different outlook on things. My life is very pale in comparison. Principally because, becoming a father, I said, I can't do these things. I can't do these things. Now I have responsibilities at home. And of course, if you know the enfant terrible, the guy who's been here as long as me, but has been on the front line, Adrian Alsema, the Dutchman who runs
No.
Colombia Reports, he's always getting death threats for his reporting. So, I mean, people have tried to sue him. He's been sent. He was supposed to be sent like a bulletproof vest from the sort of campaign to protect journalists here and so on. I don't think it ever arrived, but they promised it. So he goes through periods of sort of schizophrenia and panic attacks about what's going on. But again, we all stay here, we all continue to report. But that's an important thing, is like, as a foreigner, as a journalist, we do get we are afforded a lot more space and security, because no armed group really wants to get involved in an international scandal of that sort, whereas Colombian journalists themselves on the ground are far more at risk, and there should be applauded for their reporting. And it's not so much the Bogota journalists, it's the ones who are out there in the provinces, the secondary cities, the small towns, reporting on radio, reporting on in local papers. These are the ones who are really at risk, I would say. So we should applaud them for their work. Pioneering journalists, we pale in comparison to them.
Do you have one, now that we've dropped some names, do you have like a bit of an in-depth story that you could tell about a journalist that maybe got themselves in a sticky situation?
Well, a long time ago, there was a guy called Romeo Langlois, who was a French journalist here. He was out with the army. I can't remember, probably in Caqueta, and they were attacked. So this is around 2008, 2009. They were attacked by the FARC guerrillas, and he was there with regular grunts from the army, conscripts, poor boys from poor families, because the wealthy can pay their way out. of doing national service conscription, which is mandatory here. Romeo Langlois and the guy next to him gets shot and killed. And there's another soldier along the way who says, here's a gun, take it, defend yourself. And he's like, no, I'm a journalist. I'm not taking a weapon. I'm not doing it. If I pick up a weapon, I too then become a target. And he didn't take a weapon. And this was widely condemned by the military and, of course, the people who think. But, of course, as a journalist, it's not his place to pick up a weapon. But in the firefight, he was shot in the arm as well. And he was very nearly executed on the spot by the FARC as they came through. But then they saw his vest which said press on it, and they left him. And he was in there. Romeo was in the jungle for several weeks, and they took care of him. The FARC took care of him, removed, in their rudimentary surgery, they removed the bullet from his arm and cured him. And he said, I think I got better. Healthcare there, because these guys knew exactly what to do with the least amount of things. So Romeo got released after a few weeks in being held by the FARC, and so, but he was shot in the process. And yeah, I mean, he left Colombia afterwards, but the army absolutely hate him. But he later went and spoke to, I remember I talked to him about it a bit, but he went and spoke to the parents of one of the soldiers, one of the boys who was shot alongside him. And they were like, we have nothing to forgive you for. I mean, you were there as a journalist. Our kid was in the army. He apologized. He said, the situation is I cannot pick up a gun. And they're like, yeah, you are not a soldier. This is not your thing. So, I mean, people will obviously agree and disagree, but in my position, I wouldn't pick up a gun either. I wouldn't know what to do with it. So, I mean, that's the other thing. I'd probably do more harm to myself. So Romeo had that. That's a good story. Toby, who wrote a book called Kilo, Toby Muse, who I previously mentioned, I mean, he's gone into the depths. I was trying to think. He got in some real trouble in Medellin when he was researching his book on the drugs trade, but I forget exactly what happened. I was trying to think. I mean, I don't have too many. I'm trying to think. Some people are more careful with their stories, others not so much. It kind of depends. Matt, Joshua, Adrian. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think who else has got it. I was thinking of one thing I could tell you about the photographer Carlos Villalon, who spent a lot of time with the FARC, is that I remember asking, well, how do you get in touch and share messages? Because, phones are tapped, WhatsApp is compromised. In fact, I don't think WhatsApp existed back in that moment. And email, of course, you've got to be very careful with as well. And you've got to be on a list. This is the Uribe years. President Uribe was a very very mano duro, strong hand in military against the FARC. I said, how do you get in touch with them? It's very interesting. Is that you get a visit, but you don't know about the visit from one of the urban guerrillas, and they just sort of drop off, a little piece of paper with an email address and the password for it. And then you have to destroy it. You have to learn it and you destroy it. And then you log on to that email address with the password and you write the message that you want to write, but never send it. And you leave it there. And then the guerrilla at the other end has access to that email so they can read it. But because it hasn't been sent, it couldn't have been hacked. So I found that very interesting. So you have your conversation in unsent emails in order to get your to get your access to the jungle to where they are.
Wow.
Yeah.
Unsent emails.
Yeah, who'd have thought? I mean, it would never have occurred to me.
And we mentioned the FARC a lot, but you mentioned another group with an acronym that I wasn't super familiar with.
ELN. That's the second guerrilla group. It's now the largest remaining guerrilla group. It's the National Liberation Army. So they've been in peace talks with 7 different governments over time. they're probably around 4 to 6,000 people. So when the FARC signed peace in 2016, the grand majority of the FARC gave up their weapons and pledged to reintegrate into society. Obviously, there have been hiccups along the way. It's an uneasy peace, pretty precarious. Some of the former FARC guerrillas moved over into criminal gangs. Others have gone into FARC dissidences who don't agree with the peace accord. These are now criminal gangs, sort of mafias. The ELN remained as a belligerent guerrilla group, sort of Trotskyist, but they are in peace talks, but one asks about the whether they really want peace, because again, they've been in so many different peace talks with so many different governments, and they've never really ceded. One of their top demands is like a reconfiguration of the capitalist system, which I think would be pretty hard to do so. Also, they don't recognize the authority of the government, and they don't want to get involved in formal politics, which, of course, this is what the FARC wanted. They wanted to be recognized by the government and as a political group and move into politics. So you have a platform upon which to work with. All right, you need to get into politics. If the ELN does not recognize the government and doesn't want to get, so what are you working towards? There's no original platform. So it's a very tough situation. But of course, neither of these groups, the FARC, EMC, or the dissidents, or the ELN, are now the biggest groups in Colombia. The biggest groups in Colombia are the Gaitanistas, or the AGC, or also known as the Clan del Golfo, and they are an offshoot of what were originally the right-wing paramilitaries who sort of sprung up in the 80s in response to the guerrilla threat, but then also moved into drugs trafficking, kidnapping, extortion. And while there was a peace accord with the paramilitaries, it was a kind of wishy-washy one. So many of them didn't adhere to it. And once you have a structure in place that's earning its money and so on, it's very difficult to, of course, get them out of that. And so now the Clan del Golfo, or Gaitanistas, are the biggest criminal group in the country, but they are not, let's say, political like, let's say, the FARC were or the ELN, but they affect politics massively. They are involved in peace talks, but why would they really want to do so when they earn more as an illegal group? Why would they want to give up everything that they have to earn the minimum wage under a government structure of reintegration into society?
Wow.
A lot of information there.
hmm Yeah, I knew there was, connections between the Mexican cartels and
Yeah,
the Colombian ones.
we have a connection with this, the Nueva Generación Jalisco one, and the, was that how they called, Nueva Jalisco Nueva Generación, and the other one, the Sinaloa. They have connections to all groups down here, and hence also transit through Ecuador. So it's all connected, isn't it?
Let's do some rapid fire about your how integrated you are with Colombia.
Okay,
You like coffee?
I love it.
You
Love
like
it. Love it.
buñuelos?
Only at Christmas time when they're traditional.
Hmm. You ever chew cocoa leaves?
I have done so up in the highlands of Bolivia and Peru. It's what's done. It's no issue.
Mm-hmm. Couldn't believe how cheap it was.
It's given away.
What else? Have you learned not to slam car doors too hard?
I've learned. No one around me seems to have learned. But you slam a taxi driver's door, and you're likely to, lose a leg to a machete chop.
What else? No shorts in public.
Never shorts in Bogota. Never ever. And I'm unlikely to wear them in Medellin either, because even though I'm going to be a foreigner and stuff, I still try not to be as gringified.
What about in Mampos? Can we wear
Oh
shorts
yeah,
there or not?
shorts and a shirt and flip flops. It's so hot. Nobody cares. I'm always sweating.
Cool. Um, Vallenato music.
Don't like it. Never liked it. Can't assimilate to that. Really can't. I find it incredibly machista. The pressure on hammering away at the accordion. It gets my back up. I'm sorry.
You don't like the accordion in music in general?
No, I don't mind the accordion when if it's played like on the left bank of the River Seine in Paris and stuff. I just don't like the way that they try and force so much out of it.
Oh man, you can conjugate with usted pretty well.
Oh yeah, that's fine. I studied Spanish in school and at university, and I've been out here long enough.
Favorite Colombian novela.
I don't watch novellas. I really don't. I don't watch a lot of television in truth.
Favorite Mexican actor or actress.
Favorite
Or
Mexican
sorry, Colombian, Colombian,
Colombian
Colombian.
actor or actress. Again, I'm not good on the farandula. I can't even think of one right now. Who's Sofia Vergara? Why don't we say her from Modern Family?
Yeah, can't go wrong with Sophia. Awesome. And
Yeah.
when you think about that's I guess the end of my completely random, unprepared rapid fire, just to mix it up. When you think about your future as an expat in Colombia, how do you see yourself continuing to stay excited and expand? Do you want to continue building the hotel empire? Obviously, you keep cranking out the podcast. What's next for Richard McColl?
It's always a question, isn't it? When you're freelance, we all have about 17 different jobs. I don't want to build any more hotels. Maybe restore another building or so, but I don't want any more hotels. I feel that I've done that. I'm very happy with them, how they're running. It's been really flattering, the reception in town. We built an international destination. It was there, but we put the information and the standard in. Other hotels exist. It's flattering to me that 15 other hotels have opened up or so. It means they see a future in it. So that's cool. I will continue to report because it's a passion of mine, the two podcasts. But the other thing is that, after or during pandemic, when everything was going south, 20, 30 days without anyone in a hotel, you can't run businesses like that. I sat down with my wife Alba, and we were thinking about what we really want to do. And she is an economist and epidemiologist, so she does like reports freelance on the economics of healthcare and so on. So she wants to get more into that. And I come from a kind of literary humanities background, and I say I want to start publishing books, and I want to keep writing. So that's my main, my other focus at the moment. We've just published a book by an author called Barry Max Wills, called "Better Than Cocaine: Learning to Grow Coffee and Live in Colombia." So he's
Mm-hmm.
it's an excellent book. It starts with that quote, because when he said sight unseen from London that he bought a coffee farm with his partner who is Colombian. Sight unseen, they bought a coffee farm, and the response was, "You've bought what? A plantation in Colombia." Or whatever for, darling. You're not going to go off and live there, are you? And he goes, "Well, no, not now, anyway." And this is the often reaction to people when you say you live in Colombia. And he goes, and the person goes, "And what are you going to do? What are you going to grow? Cocaine?" And therein lies the thing. And it's a wonderful, charming, very literate story of life in Colombia, and not involved with cocaine and not involved with the illicit side of things, just making a life in Colombia. So we published that. It's been selling well. It's available in print and ebook on Amazon. The next book should come out within the next couple of weeks. In fact, I've done a sort of political and historical guide to Colombia myself. It's called Colombia at a Crossroads, and that'll be available everywhere as well. And my
Mm.
own book on my Mompos adventure, hopefully the second half of this year. I've called it the Mompos Project, a tale of love, hotels, and madness in Colombia. So I'm going through the final version of that. So one of these, hopefully we could just build on this and create more, noise around Colombia. Obviously, explain the good things, but explain the bad things, but show the real story of Colombia.
That's really cool. And do you think of it as kind of like you have like a publishing house, basically,
Yes,
or?
I started one called Fuller Vigil, and that second word is Vigil. It was taken. I've taken two surnames from my family way back and from my wife's family. So forgotten surnames, put them together to do an Anglo and Hispanic name, and just try and and also it looks serious, Fuller Vigil, as rather than something like I don't know, a clownish one. But yeah, we've done a publishing house, and I'm taking and accepting unsolicited manuscripts through the website fullervigil.com. Interested in anything from the region, English or in Spanish. The idea is to, draw more light on the region and hopefully give an opportunity to new voices in the literature
Mhm.
world.
Yeah, I had Lachlan Page on the
He's a good
podcast.
guy. Yeah, Lachlan. I like Lachlan a lot, and I've had him on a couple of times talking about his books. He's great.
Yeah, and one of the things you're talking about, and his books are great, he's a great guy, is that there's all these forgotten stories from Latin America that have really never been introduced or certainly have the potential to be reintroduced to an English speaking audience of forgotten adventures and this kind of thing.
That's one thing I have on the list. There's a story that has actually had a pretty cool ending. Way back, I think in 2009, there was a comment on like a football, so soccer podcast that I used to listen to about a coach from England who was here in the 1940s, a soccer coach, a football coach called Jack Greenwell, and they considered that he must have died in a historic event in Bogota, which was April 9th, 1948, which was called the Bogotazo. The Bogotazo started when the liberal presidential candidate was assassinated in downtown Bogota, and there was about 2 to 3 days of rioting and burning the city down and so on. That's the Bogotazo. So on this podcast they said, yeah, we pretty much imagined that he died at that time, and I knew nothing about it. I was like, I'm going to look into this. So I went down to the city archives, and I found his name, Jack Richard Greenwell, and it said buried in the British cemetery. And I was like, there's a British cemetery. So I found the British cemetery, which still belongs to Britain. So you have to go through the embassy. Fortunately, as a Brit, you get access to it. It's right alongside the Central Cemetery in Bogota. You can't get in without permission. I'm now a trustee of it, so there you go.
That's
And it
cool.
was it's a sliver of land that was given by Simon Bolivar, so the liberator of northern South America from the Spanish, the great liberator. It was given to the Brits as their cemetery for soldiers who died in the wars of independence against Spain, because there was the British Legion. And you'll find all of these gravestones dating back to that time. Members of the British Legion, of course, they were jobless after the Napoleonic Wars in Europe. And so they came out here to obviously seek wealth and glory and so on. So I went round all of these tombstones and couldn't find Jack Greenwell's tombstone. And, there's several hundred, but I went through every one. A lot have been destroyed over the years or weather worn. Anyway, I found nothing. But then I went to the notary office, one of the oldest notary offices in Bogota, and I said, "Do you have this guy on record?" And they got the books out from the early 1940s, crumbling documents. And there it was, his death certificate in 1942. So he didn't die in 48. He died in 1942. And there it is on the death certificate. Misspelt his name, misspelled everything else, and it just says he dies of a aneurysm, a brain hemorrhage from the altitude. And so I started researching this story, and it's been a long case because, again, it's not a story that pays anything, so I have to dedicate to things that actually making income. I ended up finding his granddaughter in Toronto. She was born in Lima, Peru, before he came to Colombia, and then they moved to Toronto. His daughter had sadly just passed away in Canada, but I got to meet her. I was up in Toronto at some point, and I got to meet her, and she showed me photos. She didn't know the history of her grandfather, and I was able to give her a death certificate from it. There were tears. This man grew up at the end of the 19th century. Was born a coal miner's son. At age 7, he was down coal mines. He played in a local football team in Crooktown, County Durham. Played then for they weren't professional at the time, they were all amateur, a team called West Auckland, who went to play in a cup called the Thomas Lipton Cup, which was essentially the first World Cup, and they won it. It was being played in Barcelona. In Barcelona, the team there saw something in him and contracted him to play at Barcelona. From Barcelona, he became one of the longest serving coaches, and then the most successful coach in Barcelona until Johan Cruyff and now Pep Guardiola. He was then, he won so many titles there, but again was unknown. He marries a lady who was a Peruvian dancer at the Moulin Rouge, has to leave Spain because of the civil war. He's now worked for dozens of places in Spain. He moves to Turkey and trains football referees in Turkey for a while before taking a job as the coach of Universitario de Lima in Peru. So he moves over. I found the passenger manifests of the journey over from Liverpool to Peru. He works there, becomes the coach of the Peruvian national team that wins the Copa America in Colombia. He also takes the Peruvian team to the 1936 Hitler Olympics in Berlin. He comes back to Peru, but he likes Colombia and gets a job in Barranquilla at junior. And he's supposed to take the Colombian team to the Pan American Games, but it's now 1939 and war breaks out, of course, so that doesn't happen and the job gets cancelled. And he moves to Bogota, where he becomes the guy who sets up the league as it is now in Colombia and is the first official coach of Santa Fe in Bogota. And me and a man from Crooktown, so the Jack Greenwell's hometown, have been campaigning solidly for like 12 years to get him included in the Football Hall of Fame in Manchester in England. And when they said to us, no, we don't take people who've only worked overseas. I wrote them up an article about how important this was. A working class man, the distances traveled at this time in the world, the things he's seen. On April the 16th of this year, he was inducted into the Hall of Fame. And so there is a nice positive story for you, for one of those forgotten stories of Brits or expats overseas. I mean, there are a bunch of them that I'm following up, but this one brings joy to my heart.
Yeah, I think the mic's picking up my golf clap. So that's amazing.
Thank you. I'm going to cover others. There's one of someone called Aunt Vera, who died in a place now where you can hardly get to because it's so violent because of the gold mining. She died up there, and in 1910. And you're like, why was an English woman in Pato, Antioquia, up there? I mean, it's just like there's a gravestone there in the middle of nowhere for where she died. So the British Embassy is looking at actually putting a little railing around it, but you can't get there because of the violence. There's too many, Vance. There's too many of these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think even really anywhere, a lot of places in Latin America, there's similar forgotten stories of British impact because the British built all the railroads. And so a lot of the Brits came over to build the railroads in Paraguay,
Yes.
in Mexico, in Brazil, and I'm sure in other places as well. And of course, these people had other impacts outside of the railroads as well. They were starting the first soccer teams, they were intermarrying, and I'm sure tons of other things.
Yeah, there was the Is it Stevenson who made the first locomotives? His son came over to Colombia and built the mines, the tin and copper mines in Tolima with the same railway service. They still stand today. Of course, they're abandoned. But to think about, he came over and he brought Welsh miners with him and Jamaican labor. And I'm pretty sure there's some people who've married in there, and there's still some Welsh surnames near to Onda. And Onda, of course, there was, and you think about, if you think about places, I know that in the British Cemetery or the International Cemetery in Salvador de Bahia in Brazil, there's a whole section given over to like British sailors and so on. It's fascinating to look through these histories, and it's something that's again very close to my heart, looking into them. And like the guy who brought bicycles to Colombia and started the first Tour de Colombia was a Brit. And his son, you can't get anything out of him because he's a drug addict and who might have just have passed away recently, but it became a drug addict and I think lived rough. And so you can't get the stories from him. It's very difficult. So these things are disappearing. You got to investigate them fast.
Yeah, I really think we're kind of the generation that has to uncover these stories. Otherwise, they're going to get lost to history because then once it's like over 100 years and stuff,
Then it's
um,
then
it's
it's
tough.
it's supposition, isn't it? We're guessing a lot of the time.
Yeah, for example, like in Mexico, the British were some of the people that brought football to
Yeah.
Mexico, is my understanding, in the city of Orizaba, Veracruz. And people can look that up. You can kind of see pieces of it
Mm.
on Wikipedia. I'm kind of doing a quick scan.
Yeah.
Duncan McComish McDonald,
So it's not.
Orizaba, Veracruz, 1898, and
Yeah.
so forth. So it's out there. It's
Yeah.
out there. And maybe I'll have to. I have some ideas for some of these stories, Richard. I really do, because I have some English background as well. And so I really like this idea of like the
Yeah.
English impact in Latin America, because you know what, Richard, is because a lot has been written about the Lawrence of Arabia's and the guys that have kind of gone east, right?
Mm.
They're actually pretty well documented. A lot of the guys that had an impact, in India, in Africa, and the search for the Nile and things like that. Not so much the English that went to Latin America.
It's because it's not the old empire. That's
Hmm.
part of the thing. It's not the interest. The old empire gets this, but I would get stories together, and we can put a book together and publish it about this. The Brits abroad.
Yeah.
Interesting stories. Interesting. It was Charles Miller who took the football as well to Brazil. A Scot on a boat took a football. Imagine that in
Mm.
Brazil. Like in the first football team to play against the Brazilian side was Exeter City in England, in Devon, where you sit it's a town where I went to university. They were the first side because they went on a tour of South America, and it was the first time the Brazil side was put together. It's just
That's
in that
incredible.
that was just prior to World War II, and they had to delay their return to England because of the shipping routes being hunted down by the German U-boats. I mean, these stories are great.
Hmm. So we'll get to wrapping up, but I'm actually curious, like, how does someone go about putting together a book like this? Because I guess it would be a historical sort of book. You could do it as like I guess, like a Lachlan style fanciful narration and work of fiction, I guess you would say.
Yeah,
Or you could do it as nonfiction. The thing about nonfiction is you have to have like citations and.
well, I think it could be non-fiction, but not too much citations. I think you could find like actual there are documents that exist to back up the key points. But if you did there's a great book by a guy called Brian Kevin called Footloose in Latin America, and it's about Hunter S. Thompson coming down here before he was well known, as the
Yeah,
the
yeah.
journalist. And he goes through these places, and it's kind of almost like a chronicle travelogue with hard facts, because so much of the stuff doesn't exist, so he has to put in. I wouldn't want it to be non-fiction. You need to base it on fact. But I think their lives read like fiction. because it's in today's world, it's kind of unbelievable. So I think don't think you need to put citations, but just have like, okay, the actual dates of arrival, maybe where they lived, and if they died in country. So take that and then see how you can trace significant facts in their life and put it together.
I like it. We'll get to wrapping up, and I've taken a lot of your time today, Richard, and hopefully we can collaborate in other ways in the future across your podcast, or we'll put together another Colombia roundtable or something.
It'd
But
be great.
yeah, for today, please take this time, Richard, to redirect people to where they can learn more about your books and the podcast, whatever message you want to share. Obviously, we'll have links in the show notes, but feel free to take this time to
Well,
share a message.
thank you so much, Vance. It's been an absolute pleasure. People can go to colombiacalling.co. That's the website. All the links to podcasts, past podcasts are there. And also, you could support us. We are supported, listener supported on patreon.com/Colombia Calling. If you're not on Patreon supporting us, why not? No, but thank you. Every dollar is appreciated. And of course, on Twitter at Colombia Calling, we're there, and so I'm constantly posting about the books and podcasts and so on. So those are the two key ones, the two key places. And if you must, we are on Facebook as well, Colombia Calling. So everything is posted there, but you'll find all sorts of things around. We're pretty, we're pretty active on social media, which is the unfortunate reality, but that's the way it is. But Vance, thank you so much for your time. It would be a pleasure to have you on the Colombia Calling podcast in the future. And it's been an absolute pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you, sir. This has been another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Again, my guest today, Richard McColl from Colombia Calling. Guys, whatever platform you're listening to this on, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever, please be sure to subscribe. We're dropping 2 podcasts a week consistently. We've been doing so for well over a year now, and we don't want you to miss any more special guests in the future. So thanks again. Bye for now. This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by BitRefill. BitRefill is the best way to spend your crypto in Latin America. Purchase gift cards or mobile refills from more than 3,500 brands in 186 countries instantly, safely, and privately. Visit bitrefill.com for more information. This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by Job Stacking. Introducing Rolf Haltze's Paycheck Multiplication Layering Method, a revolutionary approach that redefines the traditional career path. This is Rolf's new Done With You program, where he'll work with you to implement job stacking for yourself. With this method, Rolf contractually guarantees that you'll be able to double your income in 45 days. So, are you ready to step out of the shadows of job insecurity and step into a world of career abundance? Then just click the link in the description of this episode, book a call with Rolf, and start walking the path of unleashing your earning potential with job stacking.